Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Well, as we mentioned at the beginning of the programme, lots of talk around social media and on DavidIke.com today about the announcements of, well, some members of the brand new cabinet that will work with Donald Trump from January 20th next year. A lot of consternation, that's a great word, about the appointment of former Goldman Sachs investment banker Steve Mnuchin, one-time employee of George Soros, and not to mention Wilbur Ross, of course, who spent 25 years heading up Rothschild Inc.'s bankruptcy practice before starting his own firm. Trump said he would drain the swamp. Has he drained the swamp? Has he any intention of draining the swamp, or is he adding to the swamp? Delighted to be joined on the programme today by the former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, Paul Craig Roberts, good friend of ours, and also Wayne Madsen, former Navy man, of course, brilliant journalist. Check out the Madsen report. We'll tweet out all the links to Wayne and to Paul as usual. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Thanks for taking the time out today. Paul and Wayne, how are you?
Thank you. I'm fine. Pleased to be with you and to be with Wayne Madsen.
Thanks, Paul,
Hi.
and thanks, Wayne.
Yes, good to be with you both. Nice to see you, Paul.
Right, Paul, straight up, we spoke a few days after the election. You said at the time, and it got a lot of attention, that if this man reneged on the very serious promises he made to his public, to those who voted for him, there might be serious problems in society with law and order next year. Now, Newt Gingrich today, Paul, said that speaking to Mitt Romney, appointing people like Ross and like Mnuchin is basically a betrayal of the support that came out in great numbers for Donald Trump. Paul, what do you think?
Well, it can look like that, Richie. Here's my view. I say give him 6 months, because one of the first things Trump said after he got the presidency, got the election, was that, hey, you know what? There's nobody to appoint but insiders. He's right. There isn't anybody. If you bring in somebody from the outside with no experience, the insiders eat them up. Look what happened to the Reagan people that Reagan brought from California. They were eaten alive. They were after me. Fortunately, I had been a Wall Street Journal editor and been in the congressional staff, so they couldn't get me. So here's the way I see it. It's a good thing that he's appointing savvy, rich people if they actually help him do what he says he wants to do. For example, he says he wants to reduce the tensions with the Soviet Union. This is a very good thing. He says that he wants to bring back jobs for the American middle class. This is a very good thing. If he can do these two things, it doesn't matter who he does it with. Now, the question is whether these people, being who they are, being their past, whether they will actually help him or whether he has any intention in the first place. My own view is all these people are rich enough. Trump is rich enough if he can actually do good things for the United States, then he becomes Trump the Great. And given his personality, I think he would rather be Trump the Great than to have a few more $1 billion. So I have hope for him until I see results. I say, let's give him 6 months. Let's see what these people do. Because if you've got a guy like the Treasury Secretary, he's certainly savvy. If he's going, and he's certainly influential, if he's going to help Trump, he's going to get it done. The same goes for many of the others. It really depends on what they're going to do. And you see, if they're not caught up in an ideological agenda of their own, there's some possibility. Now, I wouldn't bet my life on it, but I say he's the only one who said we've got to reduce the tensions between nuclear powers. That's right. And he has said, he has come out against all the trade agreements, including the current ones, TTP, the TTIP, and he has said over and over what Pat Buchanan said and Ross Perot said. So
let's bring in Wayne on that, Paul. Let's bring Wayne in on that. Now, Paul knows, I've been speaking to Paul long enough. Paul knows that I disagree with him, but it's not about me. I get to have the floor nightly here. I believe it is a significant betrayal, Wayne. I'm very surprised that some sections of the alternative media in the United States who keep blaming the mainstream media, despite this guy appearing to renege on so many promises, so many key promises he made before he was elected. Wayne, what say you? Is Newt Gingrich right? Has he betrayed those who supported him already?
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding. I look here. My biggest fear is some of the names that have been raised as, for example, David Petraeus as Secretary of State. I would certainly hope he doesn't put any neocons in his administration. They've talked about John Bolton as Secretary of State. There's been talk about, of course, Petraeus and Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney, it's hard to say what he is. He'll be anything he wants to be to anyone who, who brings him on. Been interesting to hear what they all talked about at dinner last night over frog leg and garlic soup. Let me tell you, that's not on my menu. I think it's disgusting. I think it would have been better if Trump had taken Romney and Reince Priebus to a little bit more downscale restaurant. When you hear garlic and frog leg soup, you think elites, and But here's what happened. Ronald Reagan brought in people that he knew into his administration. Paul said from California. But also what happened, former Democrats got into his administration, people like Richard Pearl and Douglas Feith. These were former Scoop Jackson Democrats who were the founders of the neocon movement. And these people wanted to just basically ruin every attempt by Ronald Reagan to come to some arms control agreement, détente with the Soviet Union. They were there to basically destroy it. They had something called Team B, which fought against Reagan's Team A. And that's what I'm fearful of with Trump. If he brings people like this in, they are the cabal. If you think about what the cabal is, and even Paul Wolfowitz once joked about it, saying, "Yeah, I'm a member of the cabal." He thought it was funny, and he was quite proud of that. These people are dangerous, and the first thing that these neocons will do will be to try to get into some crisis with Russia. They will try to force a confrontation in Syria or in Georgia or in Ukraine, because all they have in mind is war. And that's my biggest fear. Petraeus is certainly one of these people. Bolton is one of these people. They were the people involved in Petraeus. I mean, the reason there's ISIS today is because of Petraeus's failed policies, train and equip program in Iraq, where all these future members of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and ISIS were given U.S. weapons and U.S. training. And what do? They turned around and started fighting. To overthrow Assad.
Which I believe was part of the plan. Now, just before Paul comes back, because Paul is desperate to come back in, just before he does come back in, Wayne, I want you to address Paul's point, and Paul has said this to me before, and others have said this to me before. Other learned men like Paul Craig Roberts have said this before. They've said, what else can Trump do? The talent pool isn't there. You've got to deal with people in DC who've had experience. Now, I'm a relatively experienced journalist, but I have no experience as a politician. I can't believe that. You've got nearly 300 million people in that country. Surely, Wayne, he could find people to come in, people who've worked in different industries. Paul is shaking his head. You'll come back in a minute, Paul. Wayne, is there any way he could have went outside the swamp to bring people in to do these jobs?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of non-neocons in both the Republican and Democratic parties that he could have looked at to bring into these, especially the foreign policy and the national security areas, because that's where the neocons do the most damage. And they are the fox in the hen house when they get into either one of those two areas: national security, defense, and foreign policy. And if look, they sneak in and they screw up. I hope he does like he did on his TV show, The Apprentice.
Fired
I
them.
hope he calls them in and says you're fired.
Paul, come back in on that. It's like we're ganging up on you, but we're not ganging up on you, really. Paul, Wayne says undoubtedly there are people in the United States that could have been brought in to do these jobs. Why has he gone for these people that you've written about in your brilliant books, in your brilliant articles? You've written about these cabal people, Paul. Why has he gone for these people?
Well, he hasn't appointed any neocons yet. I mean, I certainly agree with Wayne Madsen. That's the last people we want in any government was the neocons. You have to remember, though, Reagan fired them all. And many of them were prosecuted and sentenced. And it was Reagan's successor that pardoned them, not Reagan. He cleaned them out. We cleaned them out. A lot of people don't know about the second part of Reagan's term when he was trying to achieve the end of the Cold War with Gorbachev. The CIA was telling him that he couldn't do that. His policy of threatening the Russians with an arms race would fail because the Russians controlled investment and they could put the entire economy into the military. And if Reagan started an arms race to force the Russians to come to an agreement, that they would win the arms race. And he formed a secret committee to investigate the CIA's claims and pointed me to that committee. And we told him it was just the CIA protecting its turf. And so he went forward. So it was very hard for Reagan to get anything done. Now, as to the people, who would you bring in? You see, I was sitting here thinking, who could you bring in? Of course, he could appoint Jack Matlock, Secretary of State. He was Reagan's ambassador to Moscow. He would be excellent. He could appoint Richard Burt, who negotiated the strategic arms limitation agreements. A very reasonable person, not a neocon. These people lack visibility because the neocons have monopolized the think tanks, the university departments, the media. And so when you look around, that's all you see. You see them. Trump has not been a Washington player. He doesn't know who the personalities are, what the positions are. He doesn't know who he can rely on. And so he turns to the only thing he knows. Successful people who early supported him. They supported him early. That's all he knows. Now, I agree with Wayne. If he were to put John Bolton in there, good gosh, it would be a disaster. He would have to turn around and fire him, or we'd be at war. But I think something else as an old Washington hand that I can tell you is that a lot of people manage to float their own names and make you think they're being considered. I've seen that many times. So we don't know that he's considering Bolton at all, or Petraeus. We don't know who he's considering. In fact, we don't know who's doing the considering. We don't know whether it's his advisors or some transition team, and they just come to him with recommendations. We don't know. So this is why, here's my real fear, that if everybody jumps on him as hard as they are now, before he's ever inaugurated, he's going to be deaf to all criticism. It's going to make it easy for the neocons to come and say, look, we support you, we support you. This is the danger of beating up on him before we see what he does. So I think there's plenty of time to beat up on him, but we ought to have the evidence. I also know that there are a lot of people who are Washington insiders, old Washington hands, who actually don't have agendas. They just want to be there. So they'll serve whatever is going. I served in the Reagan administration. We had some people like that. They weren't for us, they weren't against us, but they were going to go along because that's what the president was doing.
Yeah, but Paul, hang on a second. I want Wayne to come back in on this. This is a guy, Paul, who got elected on basically three very serious promises. Promise number one, he was going to clean up politics in DC. He was going to get rid of lobbyists. Now, I didn't believe any of this because I don't believe in democracy. I don't believe in the electoral process. It serves up the same oligarch propping up people time and time again. I don't believe in it. You know this, Paul. We've been speaking too long now. He got elected on the promise, Wayne, that he was going to clean the swamp up. This is all going to change.
No,
right?
Richie, no.
I want Wayne to come back in, Paul. Hang on. I want Wayne to have time, and you'll have plenty of time in a minute. I want Wayne to come back in on this. No. He did say this, and he also said that he was going to appoint a special prosecutor to go after the inherently evil and corrupt and criminal Hillary Clinton. And he's not done any of that. Wayne, come back in on that before Paul comes back. Go ahead, Wayne.
Jobs and peace. The working class won the election because he said he was going to get their jobs back and he was going to stop all this war with Russia.
Well, let's just address that point, Paul, because I want Wayne to come back. Let's address that point. Steve Mnuchin said today, Wayne, to Fox Business, Steve Mnuchin said all he wanted to talk about when he did an interview with Fox Business was the fact he was cutting corporation tax. I mean, Wayne, it's obvious, isn't it, what's going on here?
Well, again, I agree with Paul. I think we got to, there's this honeymoon period, and even Trump will have one. It may not be as long as some past presidents-elect, but he'll get something, and he deserves something. He's got to be really careful. For example, I would hope that we don't see any Victoria Nulands in the State Department. And I would hope that he would tend to rely more on current Foreign Service officers and even bring back retired Foreign Service officers to serve in ambassadorial posts. I know he's going to probably, some of his big donors, he'll reward them with ambassadorships to London, Paris, Rome. All the presidents do that. But in key areas like in Cairo, and in Tel Aviv, I would certainly hope that he would go for the Foreign Service people and not the neocon hacks like I can name a ton of them. And to get back to what Reagan did, I agree, because one thing I know Reagan did is after Richard Allen left as National Security Advisor, he brought Judge Bill Clark in from California. And one of the first things Clark found out about was a guy named Douglas Feith, who worked in his National Security Council, was meeting Mossad officers from the Israeli embassy in Washington, and he was fired immediately. And I'm sure Reagan was behind that. I'm sure Clark didn't do that on his own. But what happened with Feith is that he turns up being hired by Richard Pearl over the Pentagon. I said a long time ago, neocons, like migratory animals, should be electronically tagged so you know where they're at all times, because whenever they nest themselves into a host, they are parasites and they begin to become malignant tumors. And we've seen that with what happened with Nuland in the Kerry State Department. She worked for Hillary in the State Department. We've seen it with people like Feith and with Wolfowitz and others, Pearl, and many, many others, Michael Ledeen. That list goes on and on.
They're still there, Wayne. Let me put this to Paul. Paul, this is what I can't understand, because in recent times, and Wayne is another one, to be fair, Wayne is another one, you've written extensively about these people, about these bankers in your books. As I said earlier on, I wasn't kissing your ass. Your books are outstanding. And your articles that you publish every day. You know who these people are, Paul Craig Roberts. He's appointed Goldman Sachs bankers, Rothschild bankers. He's appointed neocons. His vice president is a neocon, Mike Pence. It's going to be business as usual, right? It's got to be business as usual.
He hasn't, to my knowledge, hasn't appointed any neocons. I don't see how he can and expect to reduce tensions with Russia. So I think Wayne and I agree on that. If he does appoint a neocon, unless he doesn't know it's a neocon or doesn't know what a neocon is, which is possible, that would be a very bad thing. I'm in complete agreement that there must be no neocons. Now, this Goldman Sachs banker was a banker years ago. He's been gone for years. He's done other things. He's made movies. He's run his own investment firm. Maybe he didn't fit in, or maybe he didn't like them, or they didn't like him. Who knows? But we can't. I know two former Goldman Sachs people who hate the bankers. Nomi Prinz. She writes the book about them.
She's been on with us here, yeah.
Yeah, Pam Martins, I think, was one of them. I have a co-author who was on Wall Street. People turn against him. You know, the great economist Michael Hudson worked on Wall Street. he had their guts. So
why Paul, why didn't Trump appoint those people then? Why didn't Trump appoint Nomi Prinz?
Look, it's a very
That's a brilliant question now, isn't it? You've hung yourself there, my friend. Why didn't he appoint these people?
Richie, it's a ridiculous question.
That's not a ridiculous question, Paul. They're qualified people.
No one knows who they are. They can't possibly show up in Washington and sit before a confirmation committee. In fact, the transition team doesn't even know who they are. You know, I sat down trying to think of a list of people. I could not think of a Treasury Secretary. I could think of a Secretary of State, as I said, Jack Matlock, Richard Burke. But it's not easy to come up with these. And I was thinking, I said, okay, suppose they've elected me. Suppose I'm there. Well, I know a lot because I've been involved in it for most of my life. So it's different. And I said, well, how does Trump know this when he's been out doing real estate ventures and beauty queen things and gambling casinos and running around with a whole mixture kinds of people, that some of them disreputable? How would he know any of this? There's no way of knowing.
Let me argue with you now, because our time is short and I want to get Wayne back in. Let me argue, Paul. Let me argue with you. It's important to get a couple of points in here. I can't argue about running the Treasury with a guy like you who's run the Treasury. But I'm not buying this thing that who would know them. He said he was going to appoint people, fresh people that nobody would know. And I'll say this, Paul, and I want Wayne to come back in as well because Wayne hasn't had as much time. Let's look at Philip Hammond, Paul, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in England. What the hell does Philip Hammond know about economics? What did George Osborne know about economics? These people are not appointed because they know anything about running the economy. They're appointed because of favours done and because of services rendered for years. Let Wayne come in on that, Paul, and then you'll come back. Wayne, go ahead.
I just want to say that Steve Bannon also worked at Goldman Sachs, and he's going to be sort of Trump's version of Rove. He's Karl Rove. He's going to be his, kind of political strategist inside the West Wing. I think the issue with Goldman Sachs is it's an 800-pound gorilla on Wall Street. It's hard not to find that on a lot of people's resumes who've worked on Wall Street. I was an engineer once for RCA, and it was amazing how many people I met over the years had at some point in time in their life worked for RCA. Again, that was an 800-pound gorilla in the world of engineering. The chances were that you did work for them, even for a short period of time. So, it's one thing to have the Steve Bannons and the Mnuchins. Now, if he were to appoint Lloyd Blankfein, that's an entirely different situation. Exactly. And there's talk about him appointing this guy Cohn, who's, I guess, president of Goldman Sachs International. I think that would be a mistake. But again, they may be floating their own names through PR firms as trial balloons. So we don't know. This is, by the way, this game is played anytime an administration is leaving town. If Hillary had won, it would have been the same process. We who's on first, what's on second. The same thing would have been happening. But because Trump is was a wild card victor, it's increased the interest and all the prognostication and the guessing game about who's going to fill these positions.
Paul, you have the last word then, my friend. I disagree with you. I do on this issue. He could have appointed anybody. There are men and women running companies up and down the United States. They are running cooperative companies. They are running them to a profit. If Philip Hammond can be Chancellor of the Exchequer in England, Trump can do a lot better than appoint Zionist bankers to his administration. Paul, last word to you.
Again, outsiders get eaten alive. They don't last. And look what they did to Jimmy Carter's budget director, to his chief of staff. They very quickly made him impotent. They tried to do that to us in the Reagan administration. This is a vulnerability. If you're not connected, you don't know how it works, they eat you alive. So my view is, I'm not saying Trump's going to be a success. I'm not saying he's going to do the right thing. I've said from the beginning that I don't think he knows enough to be able to staff a government to do what he wants, assuming he means it. I've always said that. But I've also said he's the only one who said he doesn't want tensions with Russia and he wants Americans to have good jobs. He wants to bring back the ladders of upward mobility. Now, no one else says this. The rest of them say, oh, jobs offshoring, that's good for America. That's free trade. So he talks different on the two important issues that the American people regard as important, especially the jobs. They're tired of seeing their income shrink, no opportunities for their kids, none for their grandkids. College kids come out, they have to go back home and live with their parents because they can't get a job that supports an independent existence. These are the things that bother people. So I say, we can't judge him by his appointments. We have to see what they do. We see what he does. If he fails, he fails. And he will be held accountable. He certainly won't get reelected. So we'll have to see what he does. So there's no point, Richie, in everybody beating up on him because they don't like the associations of his appointments. Because what this does is it makes him deaf.
But he's done the opposite of what he said he would do, Paul. This is the problem, you see.
It makes him deaf to all criticism, and then the neocons can take the whole thing over because, oh, we support you, we support you. So I say we have to see what they do. You can't judge him by the appointments. You've got to have people in there who know the ropes.
Paul, on that, because we've had so much time. Wayne, I'm going to give you the last 15, 20 seconds on this. Go ahead, Wayne.
Well, look, every new president, during the campaign, there's all kinds of rhetoric. Then they have to come back to earth. Once they get exposed to the White House, he's been there once. I understand he was floored by what he was told and what he saw. He's going to have to come down to earth a bit too. That doesn't mean he's going to renege on all his promises, but he's going to have basically a real awakening that the day he's sworn in as president. I think
we're going to have the awakening. Folks, go to paulcraigroberts.org to find Paul's terrifically written and well thought out articles, and also to Wayne madsenreport.com. That's waynemadsenreport.com. Gents, thanks for giving us the time out of your day. Paul, you and I are going to have a round in about 6 months' time, my friend. We're going to have a proper shindig on this guy. But thanks for coming on.
Give him a chance is all I said.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks very much for coming on. Paul Craig Roberts and Wayne Madsen joining the Richie Allen Show for Wednesday, November 30th. And interesting perspectives there. Look, I profoundly disagree with them. And because I get to have the floor for 99% of the programme, I'm not going to be jumping in and disagreeing with them. Look, the guy has appointed people that have historically stood for the opposite of the things that Trump said he would do when he took office if he won the election. All of these appointments, particularly Wilbur Ross, Rothschild Zionist to the bone marrow, Steve Mnuchin, all of these people, George Soros men, Goldman Sachs men, these people stand for the opposite of raising taxes against big corporations, against lowering taxes against working people, against building things for communities, against taking on the Federal Reserve, against standing up to the hegemony, standing up to the war economy. All of the appointments thus far are people who completely disagree with what Trump said in the election cycle, if Trump even meant it. So I'm going to have the final word, and I said I wouldn't do. You can't agree with Paul Craig Roberts and, to a lesser extent, Wayne Madsen. You can't, in saying that, well, we're going to have to wait and see what happens in a few months' time. Now, I understand why Paul is optimistic, because Paul writes extensively about Russia and about Putin and about the spectre of a third world war involving NATO and Russia and China. And on that, Paul Craig Roberts is on the money. So he wants to believe that this guy will maintain a cordial discourse with Vladimir Putin and that a war will be averted. But I say again, at the risk of repeating myself, Trump has appointed a raft of people who do not stand for that. He has appointed war economists, thieves, Rothschild Zionists across the board. And Mike Pence is the neocon in the room, the big elephant in the room. That's what he's done. And I'm reliably informed, by the way. And I know no matter what I say, people will say you've got this big chip on your shoulder about InfoWars. I don't. InfoWars used to be independent media. It's now a media giant with a multi-million-dollar a year turnover that has positioned itself alongside Fox News as a so-called alt-right news organisation. It does commentary, it doesn't do news. InfoWars is as fair game today as CNN, Fox or C-SPAN. And I'm reliably informed by a friend of the programmes that when Alex went to air tonight, there wasn't so much as a dicky bird of a comment about the appointments of Wilbur Ross, Steve Mnuchin, and is it Elaine Chow, is that her name? The woman who worked for George W. Bush. Not a word on it. So it's not a case of waiting to see what this guy is going to do. He's doing it in front of our eyes. I don't want to hurt them. They're good people. I don't want to go after the Clintons. Jesus, man, you got elected on that promise. That you would go after the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation and sleaze. You got elected on the promise that you wouldn't appoint these democons and neocons that we see every 4 years popping up and propping up administrations. You got elected on that promise. You know, and I bang on about this every day. David bangs on about it on davidike.com because he's been telling you for 25 years, I've been broadcasting for a number of years, that the system is filthy, it's decrepit, it's corrupt, and no man or woman can do anything from within it, even if they wanted to. That's all I'm saying on that.